So let's say you took a test in school and you got 92% correct. First of all, good job. But second of all, there's two different things that this could mean, and it depends on the kind of test you're taking. 92% could mean that you got 92% of the answers correct, and most of the tests that you ever take are going to be this kind of test. But it can also mean something a little bit different, and it's because you're taking a different kind of test. It could mean that 92% means you did better than 92% of the other test takers, or that you're in the 92nd percentile. This is the difference between two kinds of tests. The first is called a criterion-referenced test that you're probably most familiar with, and the second is called a norm-referenced test. So we're going to talk about the difference between the two and what that actually means. First, I want to go over two terms that are going to be a little bit necessary when we talk about these kinds of tests. The first is a test's validity. To say that a test is valid is to say that it's testing for what it's supposed to be testing for. If you're taking a driving test, the test is valid if the test is constructed in a way where the only way you could do good on it is to actually be a good driver. Or a Western civilization test in high school. If the test is valid, then the only way you can get a 92% is to really demonstrate mastery of that material. It can't be constructed in a way that someone who's just a good test taker but doesn't know the material could get away with a 92%. That would compromise the test's validity. Secondly is reliability. To say that a test is reliable is to say that similar or the same people who take it over time would get similar results. So if we're trying to create a reliable driving test, we want to make sure that if I take it on Tuesday and take the same driving test on Friday, that I'm getting relatively the same results, because theoretically I should be getting the same results. A test would be unreliable if for some reason if I took it on Tuesday and Friday, I got different results. That would indicate maybe the test isn't testing what it's supposed to test, but maybe the test is being influenced by other factors besides the test. So when creating tests, you want to create tests that are both valid and reliable. So let's talk about criterion referencing tests first, because that's the test that most people are going to be most familiar with. And that's a test of mastery. So when you take an exam in school, or you take a driving test, you're tested for mastery, and 92% means that you're 92% of the way towards what the professor thinks is true mastery of the task. How do we create criterion reference tests? Well, the first thing we want to do is engage in task analysis. So let's think about a driving test. What you want to do if you're creating a driving test is you want to think about all of those things that are necessary for someone to do in order to demonstrate mastery of driving. In order for them to be a good driver, what do they need to do? Well, they probably need to merge lanes, they need to make left-hand and right-hand turns, they need to handle the car well, they need to start and stop appropriately, etc. So when you're designing your test, your task analysis is going to tell you what the kinds of things are that should be on that test. Next, you might check for validity. When a test is valid, like we said, that means that the only way you can pass the driving test that's valid is to actually be a good driver. If you notice that you're giving the driving test and people are able to pass the test without being good drivers, or even that people who aren't good drivers aren't actually passing your test, then that's a sign that probably the test isn't valid and it's not testing what you're supposed to test. Sometimes test makers can also test for reliability by measuring whether people who are given similar tests over time actually get the same results. So if I take a Western Civ exam today and 3 days later you give me a similar test that tests the same exact stuff, I should be getting a similar result on that test, and if I'm not, the test might not be reliable. So that in a nutshell is what a criterion reference test is. It's a test where 92% means that you did 92% towards mastery, or you got 92% correct. Now let's go to norm reference tests. These are tests that you probably haven't taken as often, but the most common norm reference tests that you may have taken are IQ tests, or maybe SAT or ACT tests to get into college. And here, you're testing not how well you do towards mastery, but how well you do on a test relative to similar test takers who took that test. So when you get a 92%, that means you're 92% relative to other test takers taking that test. It might make more sense when we explain how norm reference tests are created. The first thing test makers, let's say SAT or IQ test makers, will do is they'll get a large population, a large representative sample population to take the test. So first through 10th graders or what have you will take the test, and they have to be representative from all different areas of the United States, all different ability levels, all of that. Really kind of a randomly gotten sample of students that's large enough to really truly represent the diversity of people. And once they take the test, you're going to plot their scores onto some sort of graph so you can figure out where most people do. And usually what's going to happen is that, like my graph indicates below, most people will cluster towards a certain type of score. So if we're looking at only the 5th graders who've taken an IQ test, most of them will cluster towards a middle area where most people do well, and you'll have outliers who do poorly and outliers who do really well. But if the test is good, it will usually have most people converging on a range of scores. Now, once you have that range of scores together of all the people who have taken the test, you have a new person take the test. This would be you taking the IQ test or you taking the SAT test. And once you get your result, that result is compared to how everyone else that's similarly situated to yourself did on that test. So usually if you are, let's say, in 11th or 12th grade, you're going to be looking at 11th or 12th graders who took that test. And how well did they do versus how well did you do? And your score, particularly your percentile score, is going to be how well you did compared to other people in the population. So when you got your SAT scores or whatnot, you will see that there was a percentile that you received. If it was 92%, that means on a particular section of the test, you did better than 92% of the population. So these are two different types of tests. They have two different uses. Again, the norm reference test demonstrates mastery of a particular topic. And as a teacher, that would be the kind of test most of you are going to create. And there's a criterion-referenced test, which are usually used for diagnostic purposes, when you want to figure out how well a student is doing compared to other people. So if I want to find out what grade level a student reads on, I might give them the Woodcock-Johnson test, which is a criterion-referenced test that puts them in a percentile compared to similarly situated test takers, so we can find out what grade level they take a test on. Both of these tests have very valid uses, and as you can see, they both function differently, but they both have their separate uses.